Why is it that so many people recommend against giving advice if a friend or a partner is sharing a problem with you? In this video, I'm going to outline a few reasons why that is. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about what can you do instead of advice giving. Because just saying don't give advice doesn't really work. And if you say just listen and empathize with their feelings, that also doesn't really work and isn't honestly what's called for. So at the end, I'm going to give some alternative approaches if you feel compelled to give advice. And first, I want to acknowledge that it's really hard to avoid giving advice. Giving advice is oftentimes the natural response when we hear someone sharing a struggle with us, and retraining yourself to respond in a different way is definitely a skill that has to be developed and practiced, and you have to make mistakes. So this is not an easy thing, but it can really improve the quality of your relationships. All right, the first reason to avoid advice giving is that it robs people of the chance to take ownership over the solution to their problem. People want to be the heroes of their own stories. They want to solve problems themselves. They want to act in their lives rather than react to it. Like, having that agency in your life feels really good. And you might imagine if someone sort of had a list of potential solutions to their problem that they'd been wrestling with and thinking over, and they share this with someone. They share, well, I'm kind of struggling with this. And someone immediately comes in and says, how about you do this? Then the person who gave the advice kind of thinks they were the one to solve the problem. And at the very least, you have to share responsibility for solving that problem with that person who gave the advice, rather than take full ownership over, yes, I was the one to solve my problem. I had this sense of agency and this sense of power in my life where I'm the hero of my own story. So robbing people of that opportunity can be really disempowering. The second reason to avoid advice giving is that it places a burden on the relationship. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that all of these are at play in every case, but there are a lot of cases where the person who gave the advice will get offended if you don't take their advice. That's a really common response when people give advice. If you don't take it, they want to know why, they want an explanation. So before the advice giving, the person sort of had a bunch of options for solutions to their problem. Now, after you've given advice, if you choose one of the solutions that wasn't what they said, suddenly you have to deal with whatever fallout there might be for the person who gave the advice. They might feel rejected. So advice can be a burden because you know that there could be a rupture, however small, if you don't follow through on the advice that they gave. And the fact that so many relationships are like that, even if you truly don't care whether they follow your advice, people may still feel like there's some kind of risk involved in making a decision or handling things in a way that's other than what you advised. The third reason to avoid giving advice is that it's often done prematurely before you have all of the information. And here's why. If someone's struggling with something, they've probably thought a lot about it. They've probably weighed their values. Some of the things that they've wrestled with that cause hesitation may have deeper psychological roots. And when you immediately jump in with advice without fully knowing what their struggle is, what their values are, how they've thought through this in the many hours that they've probably spent thinking about it, you're dismissing all of that information. And most of us have probably experienced something where we say something about a problem, we sort of lay out the basics of the problem that we've thought a lot about, and someone immediately comes in with a solution and you just think, well, they don't really understand the full problem, this is useless, and it kind of shuts you down because they've demonstrated that they're not interested in hearing the depth of your struggle with that problem, or they're not interested in hearing all of the other factors that you've wrestled with for so long. They just want their solution to be applied to it. They just want the problem to go away. But problems are sort of what life's made up of. Problems are actually what makes the journey of life so interesting and juicy and meaningful. And so the fourth reason to avoid advice giving is kind of related to the first, but it's more about the journey than the solution. So when you give people advice, you're hijacking not only their ownership of the solution to the problem, but also their ownership of the journey toward that solution. And that journey is about them discovering their own values, them discovering their own pathway through life and handling things on their own terms. That journey is meaningful whether or not there's a solution. And giving advice sort of hijacks that journey and says, nope, I don't want that journey, let's just get this over with, rather than recognizing that the journey to solve your own problems is part of the way that we have agency and meaningfulness and part of the way that we discover ourselves along this way. So you coming in and offering advice is really a rejection of their whole journey in life, which can feel really dismissive. Now, the fifth reason to avoid advice giving is kind of related to this. It makes their journey about you, about what you would do, about your values, about your thought processes and your intelligence. It sort of takes something that should have ownership in their lives and makes it about what would I do? What would the advice giver do if we were in that situation? And even if you're not intending it to, if you're sort of putting yourself in their shoes, trying to solve the problem as if you were the hero of that story, that's fun, that's delicious, right? We love being the hero of stories, we love solving problems. And this goes back to what I was saying before about the problems we encounter in life being our way of discovering ourselves. When you apply your own values, your own self to that problem, it's really, you're talking about yourself. And the sixth reason to avoid advice giving is that it imposes your preferences and your values on them. It doesn't give them the space to have their own values that are different from yours. And even if you know the person really well, you probably don't have a perfect intuition about their experiences and priorities and values. And if there's something holding them back from a solution that seems obvious, that probably has to do with something in their life, maybe something in their past, maybe reactions they have. And the real problem for them may be overcoming those psychological burdens. And by just saying, okay, this is what you should do, that's not that helpful. And the seventh reason to avoid advice giving is simply that it shuts people down. And this is just an empirical fact. You can watch it happen if you listen to conversations and someone's sharing. And as soon as people start advice giving, they stop sharing, they stop giving more information, they stop sharing their struggle. Oftentimes people shut down when their friends and family start giving advice, and there's good reason for that. So it's just empirically true that advice giving oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes shuts people down. All right, so those are the 7 reasons to avoid advice giving. And I want to address a couple of things. People might ask, well, what if people want advice? And I will say there is a place for advice. It's much, much less frequently than you probably think. And there are some people who really do want advice. But that's not most people, and people will feel more respected if you take a different approach. The other thing I want to say here is that some people will ask for advice as a way of getting people to listen to them. And here's what I mean by this. We live in a world where people are very wrapped up in their own worlds, their own lives. It's actually kind of rare to get good, deep listening, even out of friends who really care about you. People just don't have time to listen to each other and to carefully understand each other's journeys. And so that's something people are craving right now. And what you will discover is if you have a person in your life who doesn't do a good job of listening, if you ask for their advice, they will actually listen in a way that they won't any other time. Because of course the advice giving is about them and they're very interested in themselves. So if you give them that opportunity to think for themselves about how they would handle it and what the situation would say about their values, they like that. They love talking about themselves. So if they're not listening to you, you can just ask for their advice. And they might actually ask questions. They might actually listen to you in a deeper way than they would if they weren't sort of the hero of that story. So some people have figured this out, that if you ask for advice, you can actually get people to listen more than they otherwise would. That doesn't mean that it feels great to get the advice. It just means that there's no better option in that relationship because the person cannot listen unless it's about themselves. I'm not saying this is always true, but I am saying it is definitely sometimes true. So don't assume just because someone asks for advice that that's really what they want. It could be that they just want to be listened to, and that's the only way they have of getting that. So what if you give a lot of advice? What if this is a habit for you and you want to improve your relationships? What do you do instead of giving advice? Because just thinking, don't give advice, don't give advice, don't give advice, that's not gonna work. That you're not gonna know, okay, what do I do in this situation where someone's sharing a struggle with me? And I think it's also wrong to just say they just want to be heard, they just want to be validated. On one hand, I think that works a lot better than giving advice, but it's not really active enough on the part of the listener. So here's what you do if you're in a situation where you feel compelled to give advice. A better approach is to become a detective, where you as the detective are trying to uncover the full breadth of their journey through this problem, their story, their values, their feelings, the things that are holding them back, their struggles. If you become the detective like that, you have an active role. Your active role is to ask good questions. It's to sort of reflect back to them what they're saying. It's to pull out the most meaningful parts of their journey and show those to them, to show that actually you're doing a good job of sort of figuring out where their journey is, where their real struggles are, and all that stuff. And so if instead of just letting them have their feelings and empathizing, you're actually trying to uncover this beautiful journey where they're the hero, that feels really good to someone who is struggling and trying to share with a partner or with a friend what they're struggling with. It preserves their ownership over their problem. It shows respect for their agency in their life. It shows respect for the fact that their journey of discovery of their own struggles and values is meaningful, and that you appreciate that and you want to be a part of it. You want to be someone who encourages them. So you should look in the toolbox for active listening tools and become a detective anytime someone shares a problem with you, and they will feel so supported by that. All right, I think that's enough. I hope you have a sense now for why it doesn't feel that good generally to be on the receiving end of advice giving, and what you can do instead to sort of make someone feel appreciated, validated, and something that's a little bit more active than just letting them share their feelings, but it's really having a deep curiosity for their journey.